Well, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. We can take a seat for a minute as we discuss our parasha. So this week we have two parashot, or two parashas, that are put back to back, going from Numbers 19 all the way to Numbers 25. And if you have not had an opportunity to sit down and to read through it, I would highly encourage you to do so because there's so much important information that we find in this section of Scripture. For example, there are significant instructions about the red heifer. If you don't know what the red heifer is or what it's used for, now's your opportunity to learn. It's in this week's parasha. We have important narratives, like when God judged Israel and sent serpents to go and bite them, but he also told Moses to put up a bronze serpent, and whoever looks up at it will be saved. And this becomes an image of Yeshua, where you have faith in him and you will be saved. We also see prophetic proclamations like Balaam, the Gentile prophet, who pronounced over Israel prophecy about the future Messiah who is to come. So there's a lot of important and rich information there. Also, there's a talking donkey in here. So if that doesn't get your interest, I don't know what will. So in terms of timeline, when you open up to Numbers 19 or Numbers 20 as you read it this week, keep in mind that we're coming towards the end of Israel's 40 years in the wilderness. Remember, they were told to go into Canaan, but they said no, and so God judged them to wander around for 40 years. Now they're coming to the end of that time. So you can imagine the excitement that, oh, now we have another chance to enter into God's land. It's very exciting. However, in the midst of all this good news, we also come across some very discouraging and even devastating information. Not only do we read about the death of Miriam and Aaron within the span of one chapter, two leaders in Israel, but we also witness Moses' own act of rebellion against God, and he suffers a major consequence for it. You see, in Numbers 20, the people had no water, and so God told Moses and Aaron, go to the rock, speak to it, and water is going to come out. And so Moses and Aaron go to the rock, but do they speak to it? No. Instead, what they do is Moses, he hits the rock 2 times. He says, then Moses lifted up his hand, he struck the rock with his rod, and water came forth abundantly. Mission accomplished, but not in the way that God instructed him. And so because of Moses' disobedience, God told him, you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them. Imagine, they're coming towards the end of the 40 years, they're getting ready soon to enter in, but Moses is now told, you're not going in. Now, on the one hand, this may seem like a very harsh punishment. If you ever read any commentaries on Numbers 20, there's a lot of discussion. What did Moses really do to merit such a consequence that you're not allowed to go into the land? And on the other hand, you could imagine the shock of the community. On the one hand, they just lost Aaron and Miriam, 2 leaders, and now they're told that Moses isn't going to go in with them. They must feel abandoned. And for Moses, he must have felt defeated. After all these years of serving the Lord, where is the reward, the inheritance, the fulfillment? You could imagine his discouragement. But you see, as we continue through this parasha, and as we follow the life of Moses, we actually witness an amazing example and an amazing challenge for us this morning about what it really means to live faithfully before the Lord. What does it mean to have that faithfulness? You see, Moses could have easily become bitter and he could have rebelled. He could have said, I'm the one who brought Israel out of Egypt. I'm the one who brought the Torah down on Mount Sinai. I'm the one who's interceded for these people for 40 years. Why this harsh punishment? And in the book of Numbers, as you know by this point, there are many examples of people who rebelled against God. It's very easy. When you actually study all those examples of people who rebelled, it all comes down to one main issue, one heart issue. And it's something that Moses never had. It's something Moses fought against. What is that key that he fought against? When you look at all these cases of people rebelling against the Lord, the main issue is that they stopped focusing on God's calling in their life. They stopped focusing on the Lord, and they started to focus on themselves. What about me? I deserve more. You see this in Numbers 12, when Miriam and Aaron, they came to Moses, And they said, has the Lord only spoken through Moses? Hasn't he spoken to us as well? In other words, they forgot about their calling before God to be a high priest, and they said, we want more power. We want more authority. They started focusing on themselves. When you have Numbers 13 and 14, when God called Israel into the land of Canaan to be a light to the nations, they didn't focus on that calling to be a light. Instead, what they said was, what about my safety? What about my comfort? I'm not going in there. They focused on themselves. And we just heard last week about the family of Korah, Levites, who have a huge calling, but they weren't focused on that calling of God. Instead, what they focused on were themselves. And they said, we want greater authority. All the rebellion that we see in Numbers is rooted in taking the eyes off of God's calling for us and focusing on ourselves. This is what I deserve. That's the thing Moses did not do. And that's why he was able to remain faithful. Instead of complaining, instead of feeling bad for himself, Moses remained focused on God's calling for him. Even when he was told that he was not going to bring them into the land, he continued to lead them. He continued to intercede for them because he was focused on God's calling in his life, not just on what he could earn. And so what this shows us is that true faithfulness, Moses is said to be very faithful in the house of the Lord. You see this also in the book of Hebrews. True faithfulness does not mean that we never sin. It doesn't mean that we're never disappointed. Instead, it means that we're dedicated to God, not because of what we could receive, power, inheritance, blessing, but rather because of who God is and the calling he has given to us. That's what allowed Moses to be faithful throughout his whole life. He focused exclusively on the Lord. And so therefore, this parasha is a good reminder for us this morning that if we've taken our eyes off the Lord, if we focus too much on us, what about me? Why aren't I getting more? If we focus too much on us, now's the time to readjust, because we see that with Moses, that is the key to success and faithfulness. So as we stand together, as we worship the Lord, let's remember this calling that God has placed on our lives. Let us focus on fulfilling our mission and our calling as the body of Messiah to be a light to the nations. Shabbat Shalom.